The television show Ted Lasso really begins with a different character, Rebecca Welton. She's recently divorced from a very wealthy man who, it turns out, had been having a number of affairs behind her back. But fortunately for Rebecca, she has expertly managed things so that she gets a lot of what her ex-husband had, including his ownership of the British football club, AFC Richmond. She knows that this club is the only thing her ex-husband ever loved. And so she takes steps to ensure its destruction. Because while AFC has continued to be in the Premier League in British football, they've failed to make an impact in that league. And so she's hoping to bring the club down so it's no longer even a premier club. And in that sense, not just destroy the club, but the fandom around it, and to bring the same sorrow to her ex-husband that he gave to her. To do this, she turns to Ted Lasso. Now, Ted Lasso is a football coach in Kansas City. He coaches American football and does so at the collegiate level. And he's taken the team he's worked with from being not at all great to actually having a really good and strong season. But he doesn't know anything about British football, what we call soccer. He's never played the sport, knows nothing about it. He's never even stepped outside the United States of America and hasn't really lived anywhere outside of Kansas. And yet he decides to listen to Rebecca's call for him to go and coach this sport in a foreign land that he knows nothing about. And Rebecca's hope is that his ignorance will be enough to destroy the team. The thing is that Ted coaches in a very different way than most coaches do. His style, as he says it in his own words, isn't about the wins or losses, but instead, it's about making sure that the players are the best versions of themselves, both on and off the field. And in spite of a rough season, which is to be expected for somebody who doesn't even know the sport they're coaching, Ted does make a positive impact on the team and on the players. He does make life for them better. He also affects change in Rebecca herself. She too starts to feel this positive change that Ted is trying to bring about. And at one point, she realizes the immensity of what she's done. She admits in these words, "I lost my way for a minute, but I'm on the road back." She thought bringing Ted to Richmond would bring about the club's destruction. But instead, Ted brought something else. He brought healing to the team and even to Rebecca. He gave an unexpected, wonderful gift of love and grace. God does the same thing for us. We often expect God to work one way, but God often works in another, unexpected way, in our lives and in the lives of those around us. God often surprises us with what he's been working in the world. And that's what we see in our readings today. We see that first in Jeremiah. And it's there we hear God commissioning Jeremiah for his work as a prophet. And in telling Jeremiah about the power of the words that he will give him to speak in God's name, he says that these words will be to pluck up and pull down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. We often get fixated on the first set of words, that idea of destruction, of an ending. That's what we think God is coming here to bring. But we forget those later words, the ones about building up, the ones about planting something. We see God doing this in his work in the world, that when God tears something down, it's always to build something back up in its place. Endings aren't the end. They're just the start of something new that God is forming in the world and forming in us. We see that in Jesus's own ministry. Jesus is coming in and teaching something that is old but is different from what he's hearing from the religious teachers. He's bringing down these teachings that are going on around him. But he's giving something else to replace it in its stead. And Jesus' ultimate work is to end the destruction that sin is bringing in our lives. And Jesus even uses death itself in order to work something new, in order to bring about resurrection of life and grace to all of us. What we see with God is also what we see with Ted, that he comes into this club that hasn't really been performing well. He comes in to bring something new, to build something up, to build the players up. We might think, as many of the characters in the show do, that Ted should just stay put in America, stick with the football that he knows. Instead, he goes off to a different land, to a different people, to a different sport, the ones that we might not expect him to go and help. That's what we see God doing in our lives as well. In what Jesus tells us in the gospel today, we hear the stories of the prophets Elijah and Elijah's successor, Elisha. Both of them in their times, we would expect, would be going to their fellow Israelites to help heal them in the times of famine, to help heal them in their times of disease. And yet, for both of them, we hear stories of them reaching out to Gentiles, to foreigners, and serving them. God is working with those that we least expect. And oftentimes God is working through the people we least expect. Now, when Rebecca realizes where she went wrong, Ted Lasso is there to forgive her. And as he's giving her this forgiveness, he says these words: I think that if you care about someone, you got a little love in your heart, there ain't nothing you can't get through together. It's what Paul tells us this morning as well. Paul speaks of this same sort of love. This love that is forgiving. This love that offers up what we need to rebuild, to build ourselves back up from these hard times. Now, what we've been seeing with Paul these last several weeks is he's been telling the Corinthians about various gifts of the Spirit. But what he tells the Corinthians today, what he's telling us as well, is that it doesn't matter if we even have the best of the gifts, or at least what we think the best of the gifts are. If we don't have love, those gifts mean nothing. That love is the same love we speak about before every service on Sunday. It's that love that we're called to show God. That love we're called to show God with our entire being. And it's that love that we're called to have to our neighbors, those around us. That we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. This is the love that Paul is talking about. This is the love that we are called to have as we do God's work in the world. God often works in ways and through people that we least expect. We don't often see that when things are being brought down, when there's destruction around us, when things seem to be ending, what God is really working is to build something up, to create something new, to give us a new beginning, to see what God is working through the unexpected, to see the work that God is doing to build up from destruction. We have to first have this love that Paul talks about. We need to be able to love God and our neighbor. We need to have the same love that Ted has, a love that can forgive one's enemy, a love that can recognize that the Rebeccas in this world are not necessarily going forward in their actions out of a sense of pure evil, but instead out of a sense of brokenness. Brokenness that God came into this world to heal, came into this world to plant something and build something new out of that brokenness. Because God came into this world to lead us away from that brokenness of sin and to bring us into new life in Him. As God is building these things up for us, we're called to be open to letting God in, to give us that love that Paul talks about, to give us that love that bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. That's the love that God is working in us. It's the love that we're called to have, to see God's work in the world and to be part of that work, of building up when things are torn down, of starting anew when things are ending. And if we can have that love, that same love that we speak of every Sunday, we will truly possess something that actually matters in this world.